On this episode of the show, I have with me Tom Drummond. He is the managing partner at Heavybit, and we're going to be talking about investing in AI picks and shovels companies, especially focus on the enterprise software space. And we'll talk a little bit about how hard it is to actually get in touch with those customers and how the channels are very saturated and how do founders actually differentiate to penetrate into that market. And we're going to talk a little bit about, what are the opportunities within that space if you're an AI pick and shovel company, building some of those foundational models for the enterprise specifically. And is it an exit? Is it IPO? Are you niche? We'll ask Tom as much as we can, hopefully, in this session. And I appreciate your time, Tom. Thank you.
Hey, well, thank you very much for having me on, and I appreciate it.
Absolutely. All right, before we dive in, can you tell everyone a little bit about Heavybit?
Yeah, sure. We are an early stage enterprise software fund focused on developer tools and AI. We're interested in technical founders building sort of the picks and shovels, as you said, or kind of the plumbing of the modern software stack, whether that's APIs to build on top of or connect with, all the way through to networking tools like Tailscale, and really sort of foundational pieces of other people's applications.
Yeah, and absolutely, you guys are in a very dynamic space right now. And, within that space, we've seen a lot of transformation. Enterprise is looking to take advantage of a lot of AI. We're seeing a lot of impetus, to actually sell to AI, but also it's a really difficult channel if you're a startup because there's a lot of different factors to consider. And the appetite for the enterprise to absorb more of this technology, I mean, if you could maybe look back the last couple of years and just kind of give us a lay of the land of where enterprise is when it comes to especially working with startups and some of these infrastructure plumbing type technologies that are coming out.
Yeah, sure. We've been doing this for the past 10 years or so, and I would say that we over the last 18 months it's been evolving as rapidly as we've ever seen. Today, startups that want to work with large enterprise or sell to large enterprise are facing sort of one of the most saturated and hard to reach kind of customers on the planet. What you see today is this hyper competitive environment where getting somebody's attention is hard, let alone getting somebody's actual hard dollars, right? And so I'd say, the biggest single change we've seen in the last 2 years is just like how intense that competition is for the kind of the time and the attention of your potential customers. It's become harder and harder to reach those folks, whether those are large enterprises or individual developers. Their attention is very much in demand, and sort of breaking through to grab that attention is super, super hard these days.
Absolutely. When you're looking at maybe what you've seen across, the startups you're working with, they are trying to get into these enterprise companies. There are some obstacles to working with them, obviously, depending on the regulation, depending on the industry, public, not public, and a whole slew of things we could obviously cover. But when you look at some of the just maybe non-marketing challenges of selling to the enterprise, if you are looking to position, one of these infrastructure AI tools with them, what are some of the common ones you see?
Well, outside of distribution, I mean, it's sort of differentiation and competition, right? I think, again, sort of the fact that there are so many companies and either direct competitors or sort of complementary products that are also marketing to those same customers and same users, that really becomes kind of the hard thing to do, to say, hey, we're unique, we're different in this way, and differentiating not just maybe on a feature set or sort of a product assortment, but on how you approach a problem or sort of how you structure kind of your solution. And we talk about wanting to kind of define categories, and I think that's kind of an important piece. If you're in that environment where you have lots of sort of lookalike products, if you're able to redefine that category and have the rest of the companies in your landscape or sort of in your arena be framed within your category, that's a really powerful tool to try and break through and win those customers.
And we are seeing, the explosion in the number of startups that are within this space, it's incredible. I mean, obviously we see the funding, metrics in it, and it shows that there's been an immense amount of dollars funneled into this space. If you are a startup and if you were around 5 years ago, there was a potential that people really didn't care a whole lot about AI infrastructure plumbing. If you're a startup that started in the last 2 years, obviously you've seen some development and you've seen some opportunity, but obviously you're coming into a very saturated market. And we do know that, cold email is one way startups love to get in touch with people. Might work better if it's a non-enterprise product, right? Because I feel like once you start emailing the enterprise, their spam filters are so robust. It's really hard to get through that. From a marketing perspective, if you're going to market and you're trying to get a hold of these leaders, do you go outside of the traditional ways of email and trying to do content creation and that kind of stuff? Are there other ways that you can get a hold of the right people you need to?
I think if you're a startup, you have to get a hold of people however you possibly can, and that kind of goes back to like the idea that a lot of these marketing channels are super saturated. You kind of mentioned spam filters. Well, we're in this sort of kind of war of attrition between model generated outreach emails and the spam filters and sort of model analytics tools that say, well, no, this is automated, this is not a real human being, and that's going to continue to escalate. We've seen people spend more and more money now on things that were maybe sort of reserved for a handful of super large companies, but we see startups now quite happily spending money on billboards down the 101, right? Which is like way more reminiscent of, got even sort of the sort of heady days of kind of 2001 and the first .com boom. The short answer, as I say, is really there is no perfect solution. And as a startup, what you're going to have to do is iterate pretty quickly on your marketing channels, on your marketing messages, as much as you're beginning to iterate on your product.
Somebody mentioned something interesting when it comes to selling to the enterprise, and it's that they want to hear about the next cool thing that comes out, but also they have to consider other impacts for them to actually implement it, right? The touch points are very wide and the implications are not always clear. If you're a founder and you're out there and you are competing with similar-ish companies, what's the question might be, what should you do to make sure that you're finding some kind of feature, functionality, problem solution that actually hits at these enterprises? Because if you are selling SaaS products, a smaller subscription, typically people will take a swing at that. But as soon as you get into I'm selling 5, 6, 7-figure software deals, that's a whole different beast.
Yeah, and look, I think for certainly every company in our portfolio, I think most companies in this space, that's the ultimate goal, right? Like, it's to be able to sell 5, 6, 7-figure deals to large enterprises. If I look at our portfolio, they follow the revenue distribution at our portfolio companies follows a pretty standard kind of quasi Pareto distribution, which is like 80% of the revenue comes from 20% of your customers, and 20% of your customers represent 80% of your revenue. Except most of the time it's actually even more skewed than that, right? There's like a handful of really large enterprises that represent like 85, 90% of your revenue. And then a long tail of people who don't, or represent a small part. But when it comes to how you get in front of those people and how you get to those large customers, we have always sort of espoused this idea that one of the best ways to get to those large customers in the first place is through the end user, through the developers and the frontline engineers who are tasked with actually deploying or integrating the products that you're selling. Traditional enterprise software sales has always been, go find the CIO or the CTO and do everything that you can to bang down their door and sell a product based on a Gartner quadrant, right? Or based on some category definition that an industry analyst has set. But for us, if you want to try and build a efficient go-to-market, scalable go-to-market, often that really starts with having a community of users that are impassioned and empowered to use your product, and letting your product sort of bubble up through those enterprises, so that enterprises that are using it in anger and enterprises that are using a lot of it will eventually sort of self-select. And those are the folks who, it's much easier to close those customers who've already sold on your product and your solution than it is to go in cold and try and sell somebody net new.
And I guess, when you get to the enterprise space, there are their own set of, big tech companies in there that are evolving and trying to add more infrastructure to that platforms because they need to. I mean, all these big companies that have moved into the space, they're investing heavily. If you're a startup in this space, obviously you're competing with not just other startups with similar products, because that's just the market, but also with incumbent software companies that are trying to quickly add some of these features, functionalities. When you're looking at that, and your, I guess, advice to startups is, where do you start if you're coming in and competing with a larger, bigger tech firm that's trying to provide similar solutions? Is it, that's got to be a challenge for across the board, but specifically enterprise. That's trickier because, as someone said once years ago, no one got fired for hiring IBM,
buying IBM. Oh God, lots of different thoughts here. But number one, I think it helps as a startup to have a really narrow wedge, right? What you want to do is pick a very clearly well-defined problem, a painful problem, a hair on fire problem, and solve that better than anybody else does. Most of these incumbents, they'll have a version or something that kind of does what it is that you're solving, but you need to be able to identify a problem that's so substantial and build a solution that's so valuable that is your wedge, right? That is your entry point into the customer, and that's what helps you kind of compete against what might be existing, already installed software. And from there, hopefully, if you've done a good job, what you can use that as a wedge to then go and build a bigger platform of other tools and products that you can sell alongside your sort of initial landing point. And over time, you go from being the sort of the startup with the narrow product solving a small problem to actually you end up being kind of the incumbent with the platform that solves all of these things. And then you have to watch for other startups coming in and solving individual problems better than you are.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think with AI, we're seeing, and I guess Sam Altman mentioned, we're going to see single company, billion-dollar valuations. And I think when I hear something like that, I translate it to, if you could solve the right business problem, as you said, a critical business problem with an AI tool that doesn't need as many people to scale, you could become indispensable. I mean, you don't have to, I guess the model for VCs might be changing because in that sense, what you're looking for is also shifting because it's not just a TAM. It could be, but it could be an opportunity. It could be different factors. I mean, from your perspective, you've been investing in this space at a decade plus. Does AI represent a shift in terms of what you think the outcomes could be for a startup?
I think the outcomes have gotten a lot larger. I'm not sure that that's necessarily AI is doing. There's an argument to say that if AI's overall addressable market is not the existing software market, but it's the existing software market plus the salaries of all the people who are working to run that software and manage that software, then that's a kind of AI-driven expansion of kind of the TAM. But the opportunities just have gotten much, much larger as more of the world, as more enterprises have become sort of more digitized, have become more pervasive, as businesses become run more online and more on technology. We're so fond of saying that every company is a software company now, right? Like that, and that doesn't mean that everybody's going to be Microsoft or Meta or AWS, but it means that if you want to have and retain a competitive advantage, you need to be able to use software to that advantage, right? You need to be able to bend software to your will to make your company more efficient, to help you do a better job working and supporting with your customers, to, help you understand your supply chain better. But like the companies that win in the long run are companies that are able to use that software well. AI and all of the kinds of things that we've been investing over the years, these picks and shovels things. The reason that we like them is they're such huge leverage tools, right? Like you can do so much and they can empower you to do so much, that means that they're valuable. Like that's why, I think for a lot of these tools there's really big TAMs, is because, the actual impact that you can have with them is so substantial. And we try to find, companies that both have that narrow wedge, like solving a specific pain point, that allows them to get into a customer, but also that have that vision for like, how can this evolve into a larger opportunity? How can we, solve more and more problems for our customers and have a bigger TAM, have a bigger addressable market? Fundamentally, VC hasn't changed. You have to, buy low, sell high. And if you want to make venture style returns, then, that the difference between those needs to be like over 10x, right? You expect many of the companies not to work, and you want successful outcomes to be able to pay for those and also provide a solid return on top. And so, with AI, you might think that some of that's easier, that the companies can get bigger. But at the same time, so many of these companies are already so valuable that you're raising the buy price at the bottom, when you try and get in. But fundamentally, VC, remains the same, that the markets are larger. It, like enterprise software, is more and more competitive. But the principles of backing a talented team with a large total addressable market and have evidence of traction really haven't changed.
I guess maybe a question that I've been curious. I've been asking founders this question, and it is something that I guess it's happening, and I don't know if we can really avoid it, but we are seeing from enterprises like a big gap of either people are seeing success or it's just not working at all. And I'm not sure if that represents an opportunity for startups to start recognizing those little areas that are not working and go, hey, how do we help these enterprises make it work? Because there is there's a portion of the Fortune 1000 that has been investing into technology all these years. So that, the McDonald's, the Starbucks, I mean, these people are prepared. They're ready to make the next step. But then we have a whole huge swath of companies at the enterprise level that haven't. And they're the ones POCing, centers of excellence. I've heard it called muscle memory, all these things. Is that an opportunity for somebody to use that to their advantage if you are, a younger entrant into this space?
I don't know that your customers. I don't know. You want customers with hair on fire problems, right? You don't necessarily want customers that are bad at technology. But I think, again, going back to sort of this idea that every company is a software company, I think people sort of forget how pervasive software engineers are across all kinds of industries. I think Home Depot has something like 3,000 people working in tech, right? I think you have a lot more people, a lot more customers that you can go after. I just wouldn't necessarily want to find the ones that are bad at tech. I care about solving a problem that is real significant, real immediate at my customers, because that is something that I know I can extract a lot of value from, that the customers will pay a high price for, right? And that's what's going to help me build a big business.
Yeah, I mean, that's actually a great point. It is interesting, like you mentioned, the Home Depots and how large their investment in technology has been. And, I guess we're referencing the technology maturity curve and where AI fits for companies trying to adopt. And there's definitely companies that will have an easier time. And I guess my question was thinking about that in the sense of, we have so many competing startups for so many different tools, so much overlap. And at some point, there's only so many dollars to be had at each of these stops. But I 100% agree with you. There's going to be some that need to wait for technology to get easier, and which always happens with the cycle. I mean, these tools will evolve. And maybe, final question. I know you got to get back to it. When you think about this market, and you've got the experience of having invested into these types of companies for the last decade or so, when you think about where you see the market in the next couple of years, and we're not going to hold you to the crystal ball question, but when you do think about where it's going, whether it's consolidation, whether we're seeing just more automation of even the engineering side and simplification of some of these things that are very heavy to lift now, what does your spidey senses tell you is going to happen over the next couple of years?
Well, look, every industry goes through the same cycle of expansion and contraction, right? It used to be that Henry Ford had to make all of his own parts, right? There was basically no supplier of brakes or supplier of tires. Like, he had to do everything himself. And then with the adoption of the automobile, all of a sudden there were like 200 tire companies and 300 brake companies and 500 people selling steering wheels. But then that eventually collapsed down to the fact that now there's like, Goodyear plus a couple other people selling tires, and you have, again, that sort of kind of concentration. The technology industry will go through that same process, right? And it just happens in a much more sort of accelerated fashion, partly because it's technology, partly because of AI. But I think, if you want to be successful, you have to be really sort of cognizant of where you are in that cycle, like when to get in, when to get out, and recognize that maybe the technology replacement cycle will be even shorter than it was previously, right? Like, there's still lots of enterprises running Fortran and COBOL, right? And but we might find that in the future, people who are stuck on a Java JVM stack are gone like that, because some whole new AI-driven wave has been pushing a new stack or pushing a new approach, and we'll have that same consolidation, companies selling tooling into that space, and then eventually all of that will consolidate. But again, to be successful, what you need to be able to do is sort of recognize where you are in that cycle and be able to, ideally, like plot your trajectory or kind of time your entry and your exit in a way that makes sense.
Absolutely. I love it. I know we covered a lot of ground. Maybe expose some more questions and answers, even because obviously can't exhaust the topic even if we did this for a couple hours. Is there a good way of A, learning more about Heavybit, or B, getting in touch with you if someone does have something with a question that could be as a follow-up for you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we publish a lot on our website, just heavybit.com, and that's our own content, but also we get industry leaders and experts to come and talk and present. We run also a series of events. You can go and see those on our website too if you're interested in attending. In terms of getting in touch with me, email is by far the best thing, and I'm quite happy to share my email. It's just tom@heavybit. My inbox is sort of always open. Does mean I have a slightly lower SLA. Perhaps I might not be getting back to you within 24 hours, but I'm always happy to be reached by talented founders.
Fantastic. Tom, I appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Amir. It was great chatting.
Absolutely. All right, that's it for this episode. Be back again, different guest, different topic. Until then, two things. One, obviously, Tom and Heavybit have a great background within the space, so it was a real pleasure to talk to him and get his thoughts on, selling into the enterprise space, marketing around the enterprise space, and some of the challenges and some of the opportunities. And it's a fast growing, fast evolving space. So obviously refer back to that Heavybit site if you guys do want to tap into some of the content the team there is producing as well. Also share this episode with others who might benefit from it. Like, subscribe, comment, let me know how the show's going for you. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.